Hello everyone, and welcome to It's Biblical End Times vlog number 4. We're going to get into the beast of Revelation 13, and then also the subsequent false prophet, which is another beast. And there's a connection between both of these, right? And they're also believed connected to the beasts in Daniel, and also the statue in Daniel 2, where it talks about these particular empires and it relates them to gold, bronze, iron and clay, silver. And I believe it's all referenced within, well, today we're just going to go through the actual 66 books of the canon, and then also the Apostolic Fathers writing of the Epistle of Barnabas, which actually does talk about this beast, relating it to the beast of Daniel. And then I have this map here, which kind of shows a map of how when Greece was split into 4, which we talked about last time, and how I believe that Islam is the little horn that came out of this, the Islamic Empire, the religion, the system, basically ran by Satan. I need to prove this because now we are facing what? In the Middle East and Africa and stuff, they're facing that system. But there's also this other system arising in the West, right? And I'm going to kind of allude to what that is, but that'll be the next episode where we talk about how we are facing that very beast at this time in the end times. But that the church has been and is continuing to face the fourth beast of Daniel and the beast of Revelation, which will be destroyed when at Christ's coming. But there's another part of that at the end where it encompasses the whole world, the beast that we face. But the beast that we faced that is basically attacking the true church at the end and also the true children of Israel. It's a two-pronged attack, meaning there's two flavors to it, and we'll get into that next time, and I'll allude to it by the end of this. But I want to put this idea that Islam itself was really significant. If you look at Islam right now, you have Christianity, right, and you have Islam, and there's supposedly, what, 1 billion something Christians, and there's also 1 billion something Muslims as well. Not the people I'm not going after, I'm talking about the faith, the whole system. These two systems are at odds. You got Christ and you got Antichrist, potentially, is what I'm trying to say. And it's not just like a 7-year period where this was developed. This is a big part of history. Last time I was telling you how the Great Tribulation lasts for so long, when Islam sets up the abomination, desolation, Satan basically sitting on the throne as God on the temple, saying he's God in the fleshly, earthly sense, because he's sitting where God supposedly once sat in a sense on the Temple Mount, even though he's everywhere, and it was just a shadow of what is reality. But I want to show you that history is a little different, because we have to connect Islam as the king of the north at some point. And how is Islam the king of the north if it came from, supposedly came from Mecca, right? Well, there's an answer for that. And it's in history. Now, I'm going to share this where somebody in history, it's called the Coptic Apocalypse of Pseudo-Athanasius, and it's dated to 715. So the 8th century, basically, 715, the year 715. And he talks about this, but he relates it to the fourth beast of Daniel. And we're going to just take his words. However this developed, but he did write this, whoever this Christian was. After these things, the good God will become angry, because they altered his true faith. He will divide the unity of the kingdom of the Romans, so at this time the Byzantine, and of their empire, in return for their having divided his great might into two natures. He will give the power to the kings of Persia for a little while, and they will afflict the earth in their days. So there was a Persian empire at that time fighting with the Byzantines. After this, God will remove the kingdom of the Persians and will stir up upon the earth a mighty people, numerous as the locusts. This is the fourth beast which the prophet Daniel saw. That nation will rule over many countries and they will pay the nations a tax to it. It is a brutal nation with no mercy in its heart. Numerous inequities will be detailed. I believe that's just in this translation they are taken out. Many Christians, barbarians, Greeks, Syrians, and from all tribes will go and join them in their faith, wanting to become free from the suffering that they will bring upon the earth, that this empire will bring upon the earth. And these people want to be saved physically, so they're going to convert to the faith, which is Islam in this case. They will dwell in many countries and become the masters of them, the Islamic empire, and they will inherit them. Their leader shall live in the city called Damascus. They will gather all the gold, silver, precious stones, bronze, iron, lead, and beautiful garments. The name of that nation is Saracen. Okay, connecting it to the where Islam came from. One which is from the Ishmaelites, the son of Hagar. Okay, also fulfilling that promise to Hagar, right? That her son would be a wild man, and you have all these nations. The maidservant of Abraham. First, that nation will destroy the gold on which there is the image of the cross, the Lord of our God, in order to make all the countries under its rule mint their own gold with the name of the beast written on it, the number of whose name is 666, connecting it to that. Afterwards, they will count the men and write their names in their documents and set upon them high taxes. Afterwards, they will measure the whole earth and the fields and the gardens, and they will count the cattle. At their end, they will take the strangers in the cities and the villages, and wherever they find them, they will call for their return, and they will throw them into prison. For many at that time will leave their cities and their villages and go abroad because of the violence and the oppression of that nation. So they flee because of what this nation has done. Now, this right here may have been written after this happened, after Islam took over the Holy Land. And because Islam, when it arose, it took out both the Byzantine and eventually the Byzantine and also the Persian Empire at that time. It was even in our history, it was a very quick expansion. And it ruled over all this area, and it took up, obviously, Jerusalem. So I don't know if he wrote this after and he's looking back and kind of putting it into perspective of the fourth beast of Daniel, or if this was written before, even though the date is 715 and Islam had already been started and established, especially after the setting up of the Dome of the Rock on Temple Mount. But that's just a hint that is out there, right? Somebody thought that was the fourth beast of Daniel. I think it's true as well. And that I didn't come to that. I came to that a long time ago before I even read that all these testimonies from history that are not coming from Islamic sources but rather Christian. So the story of Islam has said that Muhammad, he saw the vision in the cave, Gabriel, and told him to recite and tell these things, and he was a prophet, but nobody believed him, of the Quraysh tribe, supposedly, in Mecca, in this desert, this barren waste, basically. And then eventually he came and started, he eventually started up an army and all this stuff, and eventually took this place back, and then that's where it came from, right? That's the idea, that's the story we have from the Quran, the Sunnah, the Hadith, and all this stuff about Muhammad, this man who did this prophet who did these great things. Now, history is a little bit different. There's a YouTube channel called Pafander Films where they talk about the origins of Islam, and that there's no real historical account of the Rashid dynasty of Islam, so from basically Muhammad and the rightly guided caliphs, basically the four, I'm not sure, Khalid's one of them, but the first four caliphs, and this whole story about how they expanded from here and took over this area. But there's an interesting aspect of history that these guys are basically discovering, is that a lot of the original mosques and stuff are pointing towards a different thing, meaning their mosques are pointed towards the Kaaba, right? The Black Stone, which is in Mecca now, right? But it's pointing towards different areas, like more northern areas, or even Jordan over here. So, it's a big, long-winded thing to say, basically, that Islam did not start here. There's no way it didn't start here. It's actually a lying sign of wonder. Islamic, the whole faith, the system, the story is like King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table. I know it's hard to hear, especially if you're Islam, but the historical account and what we have from the Christians and the people that were at the time was that it basically came from above here in the at least mostly Seleucid region, Syria, potentially maybe even Turkey area, Pergamum area, and eventually came down, and it was the Umayyad dynasty, right? And then later the Abbasids, who came from like the Potomac region, kind of took over, and they changed the story to come from here. They created the story because they wanted to do away with the past empire that they just took over, right? In the Civil War, they wanted to do away with the Umayyad dynasty, and so they replaced everything that came from this, any traces that Islam originated from the north, and they changed it to come from here through a story, basically creating a story, a fiction, a faith, because they wanted to wipe out the history of their enemies, right? And then now we believe that the story of Islam came from here, but really what it was a king. If you go to this Pafander Films, there's some guy who arose and united the Arabs, the Tayyi, I believe at the time is what they're called, and just started under the guise of a single god, and they came down and they took. It was just complete oppression and complete. It was basically a horror show, and the story here is cleaned up a bit. through this because he was a prophet, and these people resisted him, and then eventually he was kind of forced into being a warrior. Whereas in the real story, it does seem to indicate he was a king already. He united these people under this banner and took over this whole thing, and obviously his heirs to the throne became like the Umayyad dynasty and everything of Islam. But there was a civil war when the southern part took over the northern part. Okay, and then throughout later in history, again, Islam's throne returns to the northern part when it's basically reigning as the Ottoman Empire. If that makes sense, I'm going to try to explain this through scripture, but that is true of Daniel, especially Daniel 11, about the king of the north. And that makes sense because it speaks these pompous words and overcomes the saints, right? It's a longer period of time, like I'm saying, and it's bigger than we think. If that's a mouthful, I recommend looking at that Pathfinder Films, but I do want to make the case that the story is completely different in real life than it is in the basically the literature at this point of what is said of Islam. So there's this writing here of Thomas the Presbyter, and he's around the area 640 in the 7th century, but he mentions this in the year basically 634, so 2 years after Muhammad supposedly died in Arabia after being poisoned. In the 9th hour, there was a battle between the Romans, the Byzantine Empire, and the Arabs of Muhammad, the Tayyi, so the Arabs of Muhammad, in Palestine, so 12 miles east of Gaza. So Muhammad has the Arabs fighting the Romans up here in Palestine, right? Now, there's no record of that in the story down here. You got Muhammad up here under the, Muhammad, and that might actually just be a title of this particular warrior king at the time. And the Romans fled, leaving behind patrician Brida, whom the Arabs killed. Some 4,000 poor villagers of Palestine were killed there. Christians, Jews, and Samaritans. The Arabs ravaged the whole region. Okay, so this is obviously a horrific massacre that happened here, okay? That indicates how bad it was. That indicates that the story is different because you have the leader of Islam, Muhammad, up here doing this, right? It's different. That's just to give you an indication that basically Islam originated north of Israel, the Arab conquest, and it was the fourth beast of Daniel, and it's a long period of time, right? We've been dealing with this for 1,400 years. It's still with us. It's weaker now, but there's always that. There's always those visions of what it was. Like it always slips out, right? Like look at ISIS. That's an indication of what Islam can be, right? And when it's in power, you have the Ottomans. The Ottomans were brutal. They did the Armenian genocide near the end of their reign there, and obviously in 1923 they basically the Ottoman Empire collapsed into and became a secular nation of Turkey. But now you have Erdogan there, right? Who wants to revive the Ottoman Empire by when 2023? It sounds like, and I don't know if he's going to try to do that before, but that's because at the end we do face another Islamic empire. But at the same time, this other thing I was telling you about that we're facing now, but we're not going to get into that. We just need to prove that Islam is that fourth beast of Daniel. So I'm going to go to description here in Daniel 2, and now this is a dream, right? So the king, right, it was a Nebuchadnezzar. He had a dream, and he tells it to Daniel, and he says, "You were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue." Okay, that statue, which was large and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of that statue was made of fine gold, its breast and its arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet partially iron and partially clay. Okay, head of gold, breast, arms, silver, belly, thighs, bronze, legs, iron, feet, iron, and clay. So, okay. You continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue at its feet of iron and clay and crushed them, the whole thing. Then the iron and clay and bronze and silver and the gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the earth, the whole earth. So it actually interprets the dream. This was the dream. Now we will tell you its interpretation before the king. You, O king, are the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hands, and cause you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold, Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon, that empire. After you will arise another kingdom inferior to you, then another third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth. So, Babylon, head of gold. The silver will be another kingdom, not as powerful. Medo Persia, and then one that rules over all the earth. Alexander, the kingdom of Greece, right? And Greco-Roman potentially. Greece into Rome, into all the four splits of this whole thing, because I mean they have the same gods, right? They're very similar, as far as very comparable. Greco-Roman, and we still have the Romans right in the time of Muhammad through the Byzantine. It never really went away through the Visigoths or whatever, the barbarians. It still maintained its eastern portion, so it was still around. So it's Greco-Roman history right there. Okay, then the fourth kingdom, as strong as iron. And as much as iron crushes and shatters all things, so like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces, all these previous ones. I believe it covers the whole territory of all these nations. It did, right? Islam did. So that you saw its feet and toes partially of potter's clay and partially of iron. It will be a divided kingdom, but will have in it the toughest of iron, is as much as you saw iron mixed with common clay. As the toes of feet were partially iron and partially pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong and some of it will be brittle. And in that you saw iron mixed with common clay. They will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. So this iron and clay empire right here, I believe this is what we're facing. Partially Islam, partially something else. I believe this iron shattering kingdom is Islam. Remember that Coptic that Coptic prophecy about Islam, or a description of it, does sound like this shattering kingdom, right? This thing that crushes all the others. Not only does it destroy the Persians, it destroys the Romans. Takes over this whole territory that all these previous empires took over. I'll put some on the screen. You got Babylon, you got Medo Persia, you got Greece, right, to the bronze, and then look what Islam does. It encompasses at one point or another through the Umayyads, through the Abbasid, through the Ottoman. It eventually encompasses all these regions at some point, right? And it's always in control of where? The Temple Mount area, Israel. And this thing went away eventually, but it's kind of coming back, right? Because there's going to be a portion of it with the iron portion in the end times, which is right now. So we're going to see that, which will be a fulfillment of Ezekiel 38 and what happens there in Israel when Christ returns. We'll get into that next time, but that's what we're facing right here. This clay portion, I believe, is what we're facing in the West, and is a good explanation for how you have Islam and you have whatever this is in the West, this medical tyranny, this totalitarian thing that's also very kind of liberal, has this appearance of niceness, of inclusivity, but it's also mixed with Sodom. It's very hard to describe what that is, but I believe that is what we're facing. But it never really criticizes Islam if you really think about it. These two have opposing ideologies. They kind of mix with each other, but they don't adhere to one another, right? So they're accomplishing Satan's goal, but they're not necessarily, adhering to the same doctrine, right? But that's kind of what we're facing now. But we're just trying to make sure that we know that this iron portion, this fourth kingdom, was Islam, and that's important because that's the beast of Revelation, and that was being dealt with and is being dealt with for 1,400 years. So, in the days of that kingdom, this is for later, but in the days of this kingdom, right, the one that we're facing now, God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. So, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will be crushed and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. So this rock that comes out, so you see, look, in as much as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. That's this dream. So the dream is true and the interpretation is trustworthy. So Christ comes and he destroys this basically through the power of God, right? He destroys this kingdom right here. This is when he comes, basically. And when he comes to destroy this kingdom, all these fall essentially and never rise again. These are the beast empires, right? Satan's kingdom throughout history. There's another passage in here, right, about the beasts. So let me Let me go to that. Boom, boom, boom. Great. There's a bunch of interesting things in Daniel, obviously. You got the handwriting and oral story. Okay. You got the 4 beasts, right? In the year of Belshazzar, this is Daniel 7. King of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream. So Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay on his bed. And he wrote the dream down and related the following summary. Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up in the great sea, okay? And 4 great beasts were coming up out of the sea, out of the world, out of humanity, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until the wings were plucked, and it was lifted up on the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like that of a man. A human mind was given unto it, okay? And behold, another beast, a second one, resembling a bear, and it was raised and up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth because between its teeth, and thus they said to it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I kept looking, and behold, another one, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. 4 heads, right? This was the Greece, right? Split into 4. So that's the 3rd beast. After this I kept looking, and behold, another one, like a leopard. Okay, that's the same one I just read. After this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying, and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth connected into that iron, right? It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the other beasts before it. It had 10 horns, okay? While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up strong among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it, and behold, this horn possessed eyes like eyes of a man, and the mouth uttering great boasts. I kept looking until the thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His vesture was like white snow, and the hair on his head was like pure wool, and his throne was a blaze of flames, and its wheels were burning with fire. Okay, it talks about this, and 10, rivers, 10 thousands upon thousands were attending him, and myriads of myriads standing before him. The court was set, and the books were open. Judgment was given to him. And they kept looking because the sound of a boastful words, which the horn was speaking from the empire. I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body was destroyed and given to burning fire, which happens to the beast of Revelation, right? As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. Okay, so this final beast was definitely destroyed and thrown into the lake of fire, right? This beast of Satan, right? But essentially, these are defeated when these are all defeated when Christ returns, right? But I believe these regions, they still have a chance, a chance for to be nations under being ruled by Christ in a sense, but probably not as satanic nations as they were in that sense, but the regions. So he kept looking in the night visions. Behold, the clouds of heaven, like the Son of Man, was coming, and he came with the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And he had given great dominion, glory, kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, of man, and every language might serve him. So at the end, his dominion is an everlasting dominion of Christ, right? Which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one, and will not be destroyed. So it interprets the vision. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me. I approached, stand before me, and began asking him the exact meaning of all this. So he told me, and this basically this angel made known to me the interpretation of these things. These are great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who will rise from the earth, kings, empires. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, for all ages to come. Right? We know that we reign with Christ for 1,000 years and to eternity, right? With the Father, whenever that, basically whatever happens after the 7th millennium. But we reign, right, for 1,000 years. Then I desired to know the exact meaning of the 4th beast, this terrible one, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron, claws of bronze, and which devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and the meaning of the 10 horns which are on its head, and the other horn which came up, and before which 3 of them fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth uttering great boasts, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them, until the Ancient of Days came, and the judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one, and the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. Thus, he said, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. As for the 10 horns out of the kingdom, 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones, and will subdue 3 kings. He will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make alterations to the times and law, and it will be given into his hand for times, half a time, long period of time. But the court will be set in the judgment, the dominion will be taken away, annihilated, destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty of dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms, of all kingdoms under the whole heaven, will be given to the people of the saints of the Highest One. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and dominion will serve him and obey him. At this time, the revelation ended. Okay, so we know that the beast of Revelation is destroyed by Christ, and Satan is thrown into the lake of fire, and that's when the saints are given the kingdoms under heaven will be given to the people and the saints of the Highest One. So that's the millennial reign, obviously, and basically into eternity. So we know that this is the same thing right here, and we know it seeks to change times and laws. Just think about Sharia law, and think about the times of prayer, think about all this stuff within that system. And there's other systems that are Antichrist in nature, right? Because John talks about Antichrist being anyone who denies the Father and the Son, anyone who denies Jesus coming in the flesh, right? And that is definitely, Islam is the super cult of that, right? It was basically a cult of Christianity, right? But it denies Christ, his divinity. It denies him dying on the cross. It said that God could have no son, right? And if you're thinking about it, that's horrible, because if God can have no son, then how can we call ourselves sons of God as well? Because Christ is the first fruit of the resurrection, so in the end we'll be like him, reigning with him. Might be a hard pill to swallow, but isn't that really awesome? So now I'm going to go ahead and say we have this little horn speaking great blasphemies. I believe that's maybe the false prophet, we might say, but the false prophet is the whole system, right? The whole this false faith that speaks these boasts against the God of Most High. I mean, just think about the things I just uttered, how blasphemous they were to Christ, right? And you have the Dome of the Rock sitting on a temple now with these sayings, these inscriptions that talk about how God can have no son. It's Satan sitting on the Temple Mount, essentially in the form of Allah. I mean, it's just really advanced to think about, but how do you explain a faith like that? That's an empire, a whole system that changes times and laws through Sharia, through all these things. You have to pay taxes to it, and if you don't submit to its doctrine, you can pay the jizya tax, or you can be beheaded. I mean, this is, and then that one prophecy I read to you from that Coptic Christian basically equated 666 to Islam. And then there's, if you would just think about it, it equates it to Islam. So if you look at how 666 is written, it's a name, a number, or a number of a name in Revelation, right? It looks kind of, in Greek, it looks kind of like the symbol for Allah if you kind of compare them. I'm not saying that's 100%, but if you really think, if you were to believe in those doctrines of Islam, you wouldn't be going to heaven, right? You wouldn't be reigning with Christ, because you believe that there is no son, Father can have no son, and that Jesus Christ, I guess they believe he kind of came in the flesh, but it's just a confused doctrine. It's a lying sign and wonder. Like I said, it originated here, but the story is here. It's lying. It's a lying sign and wonder. It never happened, essentially. It was all fake to a certain degree. Obviously, the empire is real, but the story is fake. It's a lying sign and wonder, as Paul talks about in Thessalonians. And then remember in the vision of the ram and goat, right? So we have the vision of the ram and goat. We know that the goat was Alexander, right, in the Greek Empire. And the Greek Empire was split into 4 parts, right? And it was the Ptolemaic and Egyptian area, the Seleucid and the Syriac, Persian area, the Pergamum. These all kind of shifted and balanced over different times in the Macedonian one. But you have in Daniel 8, it talks about out of one of these empires came forth the little horn, right? And exceedingly great towards the south, towards the south, towards the south, towards the east, and to the beautiful land, right? So out of here, Israel, so kind of in this region, right, was where Islam kind of waxed towards, right, in the little horn. And it grew up to the host of heaven and caused some of his hosts to come down, the stars to fall on the earth, and it trampled down. So this is also connected to Satan himself ruling in it. And even magnified itself equal to the commander of the host and removed the regular sacrifice from him. So it took away the need for sacrifice in general. The atonement for sin, because it does do that, right? The faith, the system, it takes away Christ's crucifixion, right? So you have no means of forgiveness, right? And it's a horrific system. It's returning to the as Paul talks about in Galatians, how there's the two women, right? The one that was natural, Sarah versus Hagar. Hagar being the one of bondage of law. Islam is a super law. And it claimed itself to be a fulfillment of Christianity and Islam. It's a super system. It's a super Antichrist system that is incredibly bondage, right? And then I heard takes down sanctuary. On account of the transgression of the host will be given to the little horn along trample the regular sacrifice. Fling truth to the ground, perform it, and prosper. Islam prospered for how long? 1,400 years. Kind of went away and still coming back. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and then how long will the vision be? For 2,300 evenings. Okay. We also know in the latter period of the rule, when the transgression have run their course, a king will arise, right? So in the latter period of their rule, we're talking about of Persia and Greece. And this is another interesting thing in verse 23. So the latter part of Greek and Persia, their rule, a fierce king will arise. So apparently these are still around at the time. And it's kind of true if you think if the Byzantine Empire is an extension from Greece somehow. Just follow me, because it's still part of Rome, right? And if Rome is kind of still attached to Greece, then in the latter part of its reign, you had a form of Persia in this region, and you had a Byzantine Empire, and they were fighting each other. But then this fierce thing came out of nowhere, essentially, in the latter part of their rule, right? When transgressions have run their course, a king will arise, insolent, skilled in intrigue. His power will be mighty, but not by his own satanic power. This king, right? This guy, this Muhammad, essentially, this, whatever he's called, Ibn Qabisi, whatever his name was, and maybe his title was Muhammad, if you can follow this. He will destroy to extraordinary degree and prosper and perform his will. He will destroy mighty men and holy people, and through his shrewdness, he will cause deceit, this fake thing, to succeed by his influence. And he will magnify himself in his heart, and he will destroy many while they are at ease. He will even oppose the prince, but he will be broken without human agency. The vision of the evenings and mornings is true, and it's for many days in the future. It's hard to explain a 1,400-year history of an empire of faith ruled by Satan, the false system that does away with the need for atonement for sin, and it rules from the Temple Mount area. It sets up the abomination of desolation. This is basically the only way you could describe it. I showed last time, it's all connected to these numbers, and it has to be within the 2,300-year period from Alexander invading Persia till 1967 when the Jews take back the Temple Mount. Islam has to be that fourth empire. And it's still technically around, right? Because Christ is going to destroy it and it's coming. Okay? But the world does not escape the beast system because they're not in Africa or the Middle East. And even, say, if somebody was beheaded or something from Islam in Europe or somewhere, which just happened, right? We had shootings and stuff when ISIS was reigning, even here in America, in San Bernardino even. So that is somebody being killed by the Antichrist system. But the Antichrist system is what? It denies the Father, it denies the Son, and it in a lot of cases it denies Jesus coming in the flesh. Now, what do we face in the West, right? At the same time, in the latter part of history, you had Darwinism rise, right? You had all this stuff about genetics. What do they call that? Whatever led to the Holocaust and stuff. But basically, forgive me, somebody out there knows what that term is that Margaret Sanger believed in. But anyways, basically the superiority of one race over another because of the belief that Darwin presented. Maybe he didn't believe it to that degree, but people utilize it in history. Then you have Marx, right? And you have into the 20th century, you have the rise of the communist, the Red Revolution, you have the Armenian genocide, you have World War II, the Nazis, destruction of the Jews leading to the earth actually helping the Jews after the Nazis released their flood after them to try to snuff out the whole the race of the Messiah. And they gathered together again in 1948 in direct alignment with the fact that the Dome of the Rock was set up in 688 AD. 1,260 years later, you have the people come back, fulfilling the time of the Gentiles, essentially from, I believe, what Luke 21 talks about that. And then they fulfill that because basically the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled, the time of the Gentiles reigning over this region, right? And not only that, but the time of, the nations, these false things reigning over this region, this faith, this nations. It's just it's just hard to believe that this isn't true, because it explains a lot of things in history. But at the same time, you have what? You think World War II, a lot of people say that, great, that's the peak, and now we're in a better place now because it's not as bad as it was back then. But if you think about World War II as an extent, I mean, that was horrific, and what happened to Jews was horrific. But history has continued to get more evil even from then. You got Darwin. You got Islam and stuff kind of waning, but at the same time you got taking up with Darwin and basically the belief of superior races, survival of the fittest. This whole idea that went into like communism stuff, and body count of communism is in the hundreds of millions through Russia, through China, Stalin, Mao, all this stuff leading to people in their own homes their own just small world becoming genocidal in a sense because of abortion, which is if you look at the world number, it's in the billions of how many people have been killed since, I think, just Roe v. Wade in the world. It's probably in the billion, I think, worldwide, but in America it's like, 70 million or something. People have been, basically children have been wiped out. And then you have pornography as well, which makes it a global Sodom and Gomorrah system, basically. Then now you have this whole medical system and this infusion that might potentially, looking like it's going to kill a lot of people in pestilence, maybe a fourth part of the earth. And we are right there. I'm just saying that it's unbelievable how accurate this is to history if you look at it from the wider years system, so from Christ till now. Because he said what? Wars, rumors of wars, false prophets, okay, and then there's going to be this beast system, right? This thing to look out for. And how Barnabas described it is interesting because he talks about the fourth beast, but he calls it like a stumbling block. So in Barnabas 4, starting in verse 1, therefore it is necessary for us, doing careful investigation concerning the present, to seek out things which are able to save us. Therefore, let us flee completely from all the works of lawlessness, so that the works of lawlessness do not overcome us. And let us hate deception of this present time, the deception of the present era before Christ returns, and we can see these things, right? So that we may be loved in what is to come, right? Deception of this present time, this present aeon, this present era before you actually have Christ reigning, so that we may be loved in what is to come, which is the resurrection and the future kingdom. Let us give no freedom to our own soul, so that it has the ability to join with the sinners and evildoers, lest we become like them. Okay, the final stumbling block is at hand, about which is written, as Enoch says, another thing about Enoch, for this reason, because the Master has cut short the times and the days, so that his beloved might make haste and come to his inheritance, which is what? The resurrection and the kingdom, the literal one. Enoch talks about this. Of course, this quote might not be in the actual book that we have of Enoch, but there's probably other books out there that he wrote. And the prophet also says, as it follows, 10 kingdoms will reign upon the earth, and there will rise up after them a little king who will subdue 3 of the kings under one. We know this is from Daniel, so he's talking about this beast, this fourth beast. Similarly, about the same one, Daniel says, it's interesting, that I saw a fourth beast, wicked and powerful, and more fierce than all the other beasts of the sea, and that out of it sprang 10 horns, and out of them a little horn offshoot, and it subdued 3 of them, the great horns under one. Okay? Therefore, you ought to understand, additionally, I also ask you this, as one who is from you, and who also loves all of you in a special way more than his soul. Take heed yourselves now, and do not become like some, heaping up yourself sins, saying, the covenants of those, and okay. So basically, it starts to get into how the Israel at that time lost their way. But basically it talks about this in the form of a stumbling block. Now, what did that author say about Islam and his prophecy? Could I just throw that? Okay, so he's saying it's a stumbling block, right? So many Christians, barbarians, Greeks, Syrians, and from all the tribes will go and join them in their faith, Islam, wanting to become free from the sufferings that will bring upon the earth. Okay, so they want to be free from the sufferings. I mean, if you had a hardcore Islamic type of empire come into your town, I mean, just think of what happened to the Christians under ISIS. They come to your town, they set up they kill you for by beheading for not believing in them. So the easy way out, right, is of course to deny Christ and say, okay, I deny Christ and I'll submit to Islam because I don't want to lose my life. How unfair is that? That's obviously satanic, and it's beheading. I mean, hello, the beast. I mean, I don't mean to be rude like that, but the beast of Revelation. I mean, those that are beheaded are the ones who reign with Christ for 1,000 years, right? I mean, and maybe there's other times that Antichrist systems have arose and beheaded. I mean, all these churches that have arisen and beheaded people, for different reasons. I mean, that was the Antichrist system too. I mean, in a sense, but the big capital A Antichrist has to be this because it's the fourth kingdom. It fulfills all this stuff, but it's a stumbling block, right? Because you believe, but then this thing comes along and says, no, we are the true, basically the true faith. Christianity, Judaism, we're pointing to us, and we're true. And if you don't believe in us, we're going to either kill you or you're going to have to pay this horrific jizya tax. I mean, there's nothing. I mean, that is, and this came way after Christ. You don't think? I mean, he must have saw this coming, right? And apparently he did. And apparently the visions were. They saw these things, and look at the map. I just put a map right now. What Islam ruled, that had to have been mentioned. And it was. And like I said, I think that even Revelation 12 refers to the Holocaust. So I believe all of history, remember the timeline? All of history is all described. It's all preordained. He knew at the beginning and the end. And there's a lot of teachers out there who teach that, there's that one view, it's called amillennialism. So essentially they're saying that the millennial reign is not a literal 1,000-year reign. That would be at odds with what Barnabas was saying, right? In the Epistle of Barnabas, like we read last time. That would be at odds with some of the early church fathers thought about the days of creation being a prophecy of the 6,000 years that would be before the millennial kingdom, right? So these millenniums are important. And if we know this, we have, I mean, it's just a knowledge thing, but I heard of one guy say, like, the utility of knowledge. Now, knowledge can puff you up, but it can also, it is very useful because the God-breathed knowledge just gives you more accurate picture of what we're facing, so you don't get into these things because I believe amillennialism essentially says that eventually we, through preaching of the gospel, will lead to the world kind of coming to him and then kind of ushering in the kingdom, whereas it clearly teaches here that Satan is in charge of this present age and not to love this present age, but to want to come, which will be the new, obviously new heavens and new earth later, but we have this millennial kingdom, which is our inheritance everywhere. I believe it is saying this. So it is sad. I just think that's a sad system because that in itself is a lie because it's clearly indicating a millennium. And I'm not coming at it from a perspective. It's just this whole idea of amillennialism, premillennialism, this and that. I think it just does a disservice because the clear teaching here is that there is going to be a millennial kingdom. And it's the seventh day of rest is a prophecy of that. But we had this whole thing that is not even discussed is this empire, this beast system that's still with us now that persecuted the saints, killed, and if you didn't believe in it, you were beheaded or you had to pay a tax. And then they say there's these glory days of Islam, there's this and that. Maybe there's times where it wasn't as bad, where it was good. I mean, obviously people were Christian and Jews under these systems, but it was highly oppressive, especially if you look at all these accounts of the actual Islam and the people that were under it. Horrific things after horrific things that they had to go through, and obviously you saw ISIS, right? Or you look at Saudi Arabia, it's a very oppressive thing. I mean, especially look what it does to women, right? And Genesis says that the serpent would always be at enmity with women, so the devil hates women, especially because this, Christ was born through a woman, that actually, his, fleshly body is born through a woman, Mary. So he's always at odds. He's always trying to hurt women more than they are the ones who suffer more than anyone under these oppressive empires. But that's Daniel, right? So let's just go. I mean, this is a big. Daniel does refer to it in 11. It really reinforces this whole thing I was going to get into. I might as well get into it a little bit, but just that Daniel 11 does talk about basically talks about Greece being split into four again, right? And it goes back and forth. The kingdom of the north fighting the kingdom of the south, north, south, north, south, north, south, back and forth. And it's all who reign there. And if you go back in history, you got Antiochus Epiphanes is probably mentioned in there. And you could break it down to which king represents which dynasty or whatever. But eventually it gets to like when Rome is ruling in the north, coming down and fighting the south because, like when, Caesar. Basically, eventually it goes from, it has Julius Caesar at some point, and it goes into where it finds, it gets to Augustus, and that's important because, say in verse 20, 11:20 of Daniel is getting to where Augustus reigned as the king of the north, right? Then in his place, after, I would say after Julius Caesar, then in his place, one will arise who will send an oppressor through the jewel of his kingdom, which is another translation says he taxes the glorious kingdom, yet within a few days he will be shattered, though not in anger or not in battle. And the reason I think this is Augustus Caesar, as others think, is because he taxes the holy nation, right, Israel, right, and that's kind of the story of Christ, right? Because there's, or what I mean is that, the story of Mary and Joseph going to be counted and taxed and everything is because Augustus, he introduced the taxes over the kingdom. It's a very famous thing that he did, and within a few days he will be shattered, though not in anger or battle. And I think Augustus just died. I don't think he died in battle. I think he died of natural causes, if memory serves me right, or maybe he got sick. I can't remember, but I know it's not from anger or battle. The reason he's significant is he's the first emperor of Rome, right? So his dynasty lasts from till the Byzantine Empire through the emperors, right? So he's the first emperor, and all the emperors that proceed after him kind of fulfill this prophecy. But in his place a despicable person will arise, one whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred, but he will come in the time of tranquility and seize the kingdom by intrigue. I think that's, again, this whole system right here, rising in the north. The overflowing forces will be flooded away before him and be shattered, and also the prince of the covenant. After an alliance is made with him, he will practice deception. So I believe the prince of the covenant is referring to Christ. So he's coming against his people, right? Because if you persecute me, why are you persecuting me when he was persecuting his people? And this guy doesn't get. He just comes and takes over and says he's king. He doesn't given that authority through any dynasty. It's just this Tayyi Islamic Arabian thing that came out of nowhere, and it came in a time of tranquility, and the overflowing force. Okay, after an alliance is made with him, he will practice deception and will go up and gain power over a small force of people. With a small force of people, an alliance is made with him. I believe reading in these documents, the Jews made alliance with him, and he flipped it on them. Gosh, I wish I had. That's in history too. And another indicator here is like in the time of tranquility, he will enter into the richest part of the realm, and he will accomplish what his fathers never did, nor his ancestors. He will distribute plunder, booty, and possessions among them, and we could devise his schemes against strongholds, but only for a time. So this king of the north, which I believe was the first ruler of Islam, he divided the plunder, which even in the story that we have from the southern story of Islam, this is the same thing Muhammad was doing. He divides it among his men, and so it's this kind of like pirate angle on this whole empire too, which is true. He would stir up his strength and courage against the king of the south with a large army, so the king of the south will mobilize an extremely large and mighty army for war, but he will not stand, for schemes will be devised against him. Those who eat the choice food will destroy him, and his army will overflow with many, but will be slain. As for both kings, their hearts will be intent on evil, and they will speak lies to each other at the same table, and not succeed, for the end is still to come at the appointed time. Then he will return to his land, much plunder. In verse 26 it said, those who eat his choice food will destroy him, and his army will be overflown, but many will fall and be slain. Now this is really hard to think, but just for me, I get that I think this is describing the origin of Islam from the north, and eventually becomes eventually the Umayyad dynasty, and the Abbasid dynasty comes up, and there's a civil war within Islam, right? And it's this north and south thing, and then eventually, obviously, the southern part does win for a while, and it creates the faith, but it is eventually taken over by the Ottoman thing, right? Because those who eat the choice food will destroy him, his army, and I think it says his delicacies. They eat his choice food will destroy him, and his army will be overflown, and many will fall down and be slain. So I think this is talking about the people who fight him, like to take back over from the north, that take back over this system, is they eat they believe in the same food that the Abbasid created, which was the false faith of Islam, and it returns to the north. And then eventually you have the king of the north. They're fighting again, but it does mention that the king of the north at some point sets up the abomination of desolation of verse 31. Okay, so verse 30, ships of Kittim will come against him, therefore he will be disheartened and will destroy, become enraged at the holy covenant, and take action, so he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. So those who hate the holy covenant, which is Christianity and Judaism, forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice, which I believe is blood atonement for sin. And they will set there the abomination of desolation. Okay, boom. The Domarok, by smooth words, he will turn godliness, those who act wickedly toward the covenant. But the people who know their God will display strength and take action. Those who have insight among the people will give understanding to many. Yet they will fall by the sword and by flame and by captivity and plunder for many days, many years, right? I think that's the Great Tribulation. Those who believe the truth that are killed and basically clothed in sackcloth and mourning because of this horrific tribulation that has lasted for that long. Now when they fall, they will be granted a little help, and many will join them in hypocrisy. Some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, to purge them, and make them pure until the time of the end, which is still to come for the appointed time. So the end is not yet, right? This thing's still going on, and the king will do as he pleases and will exalt himself, magnify himself. Again, this is, I believe this is in relation to Islam. He talks against the God of gods, the monstrous thing, and he will prosper until the indignation is finished, for what which is decreed will be done. It'll prosper until the end of time, essentially. He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers or for the desire of women. Again, Satan against the women. Look what Islam does to women. Subject against him. Nor will he show regard for the other God, for any other God. He will magnify himself above them all. So this magnifies itself above them all. Satan in this form. But instead he will honor a God of fortresses, a God of war basically. A God whom his fathers did not know. He will honor him with gold, silver, and costly stones and treasures. He will take action against the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign God. And he will give great honor to those who acknowledge him, and will cause them to rule over many, and will parcel out the land for a price. Okay. I mean, we know that that's true even of this prophecy, that he divides the land and everything. And also it connects to the fact that there is a God in this whole system. They do believe in some God. Maybe it's Allah, but obviously it's Satan, right? At the same time. The Antichrist is not a secular being in this sense. This fourth kingdom, this thing that set up the abomination of desolation. And it gets into the time of the end, how it returns to the kingdom of the north again, which I believe is the revival of the Ottoman Empire, and how that's what's destroyed at the end in this iron portion of this. Okay, so that's just another case. Something that's, I mean, pretty advanced. And then you got Revelation, I mean, just the description of the third beast in Revelation 13. So it's called the beast from the sea. And the dragon stood on the sand, the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore, Satan. And he saw a beast coming up out of the sea, right? And the sea was where the fourth beast came from in Daniel, right? All the beasts came out of the sea, the world, right? The humanity, sea of humanity. Maybe there's more to it than that. Somebody probably knows the other keys than that. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns, 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names, okay? The beast which I saw was like a leopard, his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth was like that of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his throne, and great authority. So the beast of Daniel, I believe it's the same geographic locations as all these empires, but this empire has them all, which is Islam, right? It had them all the same territory as these previous empires. And the authority is given to it by who? Satan, which we connect this to the little horn, right? And the iron portion of the statue. And the whole earth was amazed. Okay, and I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. Now, this could be the revitalization of the beast at the end. I think that, but there might be more to it. Maybe somebody knows this more spiritual answer. They worship the dragon because he gave authority to the beast. And they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? How do you explain this? They worship the devil, the dragon, who gives power, authority to the beast, but they worship the beast, the system, Islam, this whole thing, this empire that is basically overcomes the saints. There is given a mouth speaking great words, blasphemies, authority to act for 42 months, which is what, 1,278 years basically, which is how long Islam basically lasted before it became secularized for, I mean, the imperial nation, the nature of it, the Ottoman. And it continued for that long. His mouth is great blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and that is those who dwell in heaven. So the people, and he blasphemes those who went up there because what does Islam say? They're false. They died with the delusion of the cross, that God can have a son, and criticize all the people who are going to be resurrected, Moses and stuff. I mean, for believing in the God of what was the law, the God of the prophets, God of Isaac and Jacob, and Christ himself. It is also given to him to make war with the saints, to overcome them, and authority over every tribe, people, language, tongue, and nation is given to him. Okay, we know that that's true. The king of the north, the fourth beast, little horn, all who dwell on the earth will worship him. Everyone whose name is not written in the foundation of the world, book of life of the Lamb, who has been slain. If anyone has near, let him hear. If anyone is destined for captivity or to captivity, he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. I mean, that's a pretty good description of what the whole system of Islam did. Put people in captivity, kill with the sword. I mean, there's other things you can take from this, but that's just like kind of like the earthly level of what I think this beast was. And it connects it also to another beast, right? Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. That one came out of the sea. This one comes out of the earth. This might be earthly teaching. Like this, I believe you have the imperial nation right here, the satanic rule, as mentioned in this first beast here, which is a territorial thing. It's an empire, it's a people, it's a false thing, it's very blasphemous, very boastful, and actually persevering and taking over land, killing the church, killing the people who believe. Then I saw another beast coming out of the earth, this false teaching, I believe, had two horns, like a lamb, and spoke like a dragon. So it's kind of like a lamb, right? Islam itself, this whole idea of this prophet that came up, and it was kind of peaceful, but he has an edge to him, right? That is brutal against other faiths, right? And it's always this duality with Islam that it's hard to kind of criticize sometimes, because there's just in the writings of it, there's equally positive and equally merciful and equally brutal passages in there. So he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and he makes the earth and those who dwell on the earth to worship the first beast whose fatal bone was healed. So this faith worship this system, this empire, this false prophet, this whole thing, He performs great signs and even makes fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the presence of the men. Fire, is it literal fire coming down, or is it the fire of this fake word coming down out of heaven to the earth in the presence of men? It's a false sign, right? Performs great signs. Do you think the Janes and Janus and Jambres, when they performed their signs with Moses, was it real, or was it a kind of a magic trick? I think this is a false deception, this false miracles that you don't have to see because they don't have any power in them. In real, it's just the power to deceive. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given to him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast, who had the wound of the sword but had come to life. The beast, the image of the beast. It was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the beast would even speak and cause as many who do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. This faith, they created this faith, and if you don't worship, there's an image there, right? You got the Kaaba in Mecca, this stone, the black stone, and all over the world, 5 times a day. When you hear the beast, essentially, you hear this image speak, because it puts out that mezzanine call, and everybody all around the world bows towards this image 5 times a day. Times, right? And that's a law, the whole law system changes the times 5 times a day, potentially. I mean, even changes time. There's Islamic calendar is different than the calendar we have that is attributed both to Christ and understanding exactly how time is actually laid out, not this whole thing where it starts when this prophet went to Jerusalem. Muhammad, that's how they base time, but it created this system. Line, sign, and wonder. And if you don't worship the beast, what happens? Or the image of the beast, you can be beheaded because you're not bowing towards the stone, the image. It's a physical image, an actual thing, but it also speaks 5 times a day through the call, this sound rate. 5 times a day. How else is it going to speak? And it makes all this finished. Maybe there's more to it than that. There might be a spiritual level to this. But he causes all the small, the great, the rich, and the poor, the free men, the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. And he provides that no one will be able to buy or to sell except the one who has the mark, either the name, the number, either the name, it's a mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. So it's either name, number, or it's a mark. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. Now, this prophet attributed 666 to the beast. I don't know if that's how that's written, but I know that this does look like the symbol for Allah in Arab. That might be what it's referring to. It might be referring to. There's this other thing where there's, I think the number 318, according to Barnabas, represents something about the cross, and this might be another reference to something else, but I have to come back and kind of discover what that means. But basically, we know that this beast right here, this false prophet, are thrown into the lake of fire when Christ returns. So this whole false teaching, this false empire, will be cast in a lake of fire because it's a stumbling block to the saints. It's this whole oppressive thing, returning to Hagar, again, returning to this law, but it's even more brutal than that because it's definitely satanic. It's not even God-breathed law, it's a satanic law. It's an earthly teaching that obviously leads to beheading, it leads to oppression of women, it leads to whole nations being overcome by this thing, and it basically makes person get all that he desires. You can collect, if you fight for me, you'll get this. You can have these slaves. You can have all the women. I mean, there's this whole thing. I mean, it just really is fulfilled within this. Now, what do we have though? The first beast was from the sea, and then you had this beast that is from the earth. So the sea is I think this is attributed to the sea of humanity, the empire portion, and then you have the earth, the earthly teaching, mixing together to create this beast system, right? This whole religion, changing law. It's this whole, how do you even describe that system? That whole, I mean, it's spiritual, it's physical, it's ruled by Satan, it has Temple Mount, I mean, that's just you're thinking, I know I'm kind of putting this out there in an unprofessional manner, but hopefully somebody out there can understand that in the course of history, based off what I told you last time, and then with the millenniums. I mean, this has to be true, and they obviously are destroyed when Christ returns. It's finally the iron is finally 100% destroyed when he returns. So Islam itself is never coming back. But these nations that like the Roman regions, the Persian regions and stuff, they do survive humanity-wise. Even like, it's just that the faith, the whole system is going to be completely destroyed forever, because that should never be allowed to deceive the nations again. That false prophet. Now, if that's a false prophet, then it means that the two prophets, the one in Revelation 11, is probably Israel and the church, the New Testament, the Old Testament, the two covenantal people, basically the elect, because Romans 11 does still indicate that the Jews in Israel are still elect at some point. Now, it doesn't mean that all of them are, but at least the remnant. And it says all Israel shall be saved. So the people, he's going to save them in unbelief, because when Christ comes, he's going to show that he was indeed the heir to the Davidic throne at some point. I mean, it's all right there. It's just hard to believe because everybody we have all these biases that this has to be this has to be that. But God is very merciful, and I mean, how much bondage do you feel just sometimes, just some different teachings in the church about how you're nothing, you're kind of scum, and God he's going to save you, but only just barely, and then you have to keep kind of working towards it. Whereas he's saying here that if you follow him and you truly believe what he's saying, then you're going to inherit the earth. You're going to reign with him for 1,000 years, and he's giving you the kingdom right here. It's talking in Daniel. You're going to rule and reign, and we're worried about these little things here, and we're giving power to these teachers. I mean, it's just crazy where we're at. I'm just thinking about it now. You had Islam come, you had all these divisions within the church, but the people that believe and truly believe unto death, and who find the truth, and they can find it in these scriptures, because he desires the people that worship in spirit and truth. It's just crazy where we're at. It's almost like rediscovering it, but it doesn't mean that people in the denominations and everything are, because there's Christians everywhere. There's true elect within every Christian community, and that's one thing I came to believe too. How I kind of started looking at this Islamic possibility, at least for the fourth beast here, the iron portion, is that when ISIS was reigning and they went and they had control of a portion of Libya, and the first video that they had, they beheaded 21 Coptic Egyptian Christians, right? And I found out that the Coptic church was slightly different than the one I knew, and that church was Orthodox, okay? and it's Oriental Orthodox. So there's actually a split within Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox if you actually kind of look at it. That they might have a lot in common too, but so that's another split that happened like 400 years into the church over the nature of Christ. Anyways, but these people, they died for their faith. They were beheaded for the testimony of Christ. Were they not Christians? And I even looked up some Protestant teachings where they were saying that they might not be Christians because they don't have the gospel, because they're works based, and there might be some truth into that. But if you believe in Christ, are you saved? Are you looking to the right thing? I mean, it's just so horrible, the teachings of the earthly teachings we have of Christianity. I mean, once we delve into this, it's just really miraculous. It's the word for ourselves. And I think if we have the truth within us, if we have the Holy Spirit, He can guide us. I don't know if we need necessarily a teacher or somebody over us at this point. I think we're supposed to be able to see these things and explain them just from Him telling us. And maybe it's at the end when all the leaders, we have been there's itching ears and they've heaped up these teachers. But I mean, there's probably a lot of people out there having dreams that are, most of you guys are probably like me, we're nothing in this world. I don't know. Anyways, the point is that the fourth beast is most likely Islam. And now the next one I'm going to describe this iron and clay portion, because I believe this is what the church is facing at the end. And this is what Christ comes to destroy. Not only Islam, which He's going to throw into the lake of fire, the empire, which is coming back, an Ottoman rule, but this clay portion, this medical tyranny, this whole system of the West, whatever it is developed into, at the same time, Christ will come. But that's the fourth beast of Daniel.